Hi you guys, we're going to start watercolors now, and I have a book that I'm going to alter just to experiment. I want to show you some different techniques with watercolors. You got to have a lot of water, right? That's why it's called watercolors. And you want to get some water on your palette. Anything you use that's nice and flat but has an edge could be a palette. You've got actual palettes at school. So I'm going to get a pretty big glob of water there. And I'm only using the three primary colors: blue, yellow, and red. And you shall soon find out why that's all you need. I'm going to get a little bit of blue to start with. Teeny tiny bit. Look at that. Watercolors. Mostly water. Tiny bit of paint. Very concentrated paint. So you can see right now, I'm going to let some of my water go out to the side. But just from that tiny bit of paint, look at how much color I get. So please start with a tiny bit of paint. Then you're going to get your brush all nice and full. And you're going to just start doing some shapes. Just try out the colors. See how deep the color is or how pale the color is. If that's too pale, that's when you would dip in and get a little more color, a little more pigment. Watercolors are very, very concentrated. Once you get something wet, you can paint back into it. That's called wet and wet. You can also paint right on the page, the dry page, if you want your paint to stay in one place. Another thing I want you to experiment as you're playing with colors is different kinds of brushes. This is a round brush. You can touch it to the page and get a fine line. You can touch it to the page, then push down and get a wider line. Okay, so that's this kind of brush. It's a round brush. You also have flat brushes. This is a flat brush. This is a big flat brush. That's going to be for when you want a whole page to be wet. And just imagine you want this whole page wet over here. What if I was doing that with this little tiny brush, trying to get that whole page wet? I'm going to wear the brush out. It's going to take forever. So whenever we need a big brush, we get a big brush. When we need a small pointed brush, we get that. Do not be too lazy to get up out of your seat and go over and get the right size brush. You can see already on the page that I got wet how it's spreading. When you paint onto a wet page, it softens and spreads out. Now this is an old book, so it's not very bright. The colors aren't going to be as bright. So it's going to be important for you to experiment and see what happens on this kind of a page, but also to see what happens on your watercolor paper. So we're going to experiment on them. We're going to experiment on both. Now, the hard thing is letting the colors dry in between. So we're going to use a hair dryer for that. And in between every color, look at that, big container of water. I'm washing the brush out, and I'm not leaving the brush in the water. That causes the tips to permanently bend, like this one. So I'm going to rinse it out. I'm going to lay it down next to my work, and then I'm going to go get the hairdryer so I can dry this and show you how we can do some layering. Alright,